By the River Reading Series. Coming to you from Wawayangatanong in the Three Fires Confederacy territories, currently inhabited by Windsor, Ontario and Detroit, Michigan. Brought to you in part by Windsor Feminist Theater, a nonprofit theater company founded in 1980. Also in partnership with Urban Farmhouse Press, an independent, Indigenous-owned literary press producing fine literature since 2013.
Well, welcome everybody, welcome. So this is By the River, our first event this year, and we are online. I'm Emily Lockhart. And with us this afternoon, we have Bob Campbell from Flint, Michigan, a former newspaper reporter, Khary Mason, a former homicide police detective, and we have Irene Moore Davis here with us tonight, who's going to be doing the moderating. Thank you all for coming out tonight. We are so happy to have you here. So before we begin, I just want to recognize that we are on the land of the Three Fires Confederacy, ownership to the Odawa, Potawatomi, and Anishinaabe people. I want to also recognize tonight the Windsor Feminist Theater has been the sponsors of tonight's event. We're very thankful for that. And then lastly, I'd like to take a moment to recognize one of Windsor's historical archives, a real community leader that we've lost earlier this week, Sheldon Taylor. So I just want to recognize that. Now, without further ado, I am going to take a step back and let these wonderful people moderate tonight. And I will be in the background. So thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Emily. Emily Lockhart is really the backbone of the By the River reading series, and we're so glad that she is working the controls today. She's in the control tower, so this is very wonderful. And she has already done the land acknowledgement. I want to acknowledge By the River, in fact. Founded in 2015, By the River is a reading series that weaves together people in the communities of Wawayatanong. This is a gathering of writers from all over Turtle Island, and we know that story is imperative to our collective humanity, and we strive to empower and ignite imagination through written and spoken words so that we can build a bridge to connect writers, audiences, and communities. So with that said, as we're letting people in, I want to begin with a bit of housekeeping. First of all, I'm Irene Moore Davis, for those that are joining a little late, and I'm so happy to be hosting this session with the powerful Khary Mason and Bob Campbell, two outstanding voices from the great state of Michigan. So a bit of housekeeping. After the introductions, we'll be inviting both of our guest authors to share some of their written work with us, and I will then pose a few questions to them. After that, we're going to take some questions from the audience. So participants, please use the chat function to ask your questions. And of course, we request that our audience members please remain muted throughout the event. Emily will have control of that, but please know that that's what's happening. You will not be asking your questions live. And we definitely suggest that you switch to speaker view rather than gallery view for the duration of this event so that you can clearly see our guest authors who are going to be presenting wonderful work to us. So we're thrilled to offer this event with two outstanding voices. Both of these gentlemen reside in Michigan, but they both have connections to Windsor and Essex County, as I will explain. First, we have Bob Campbell, who is a writer based in Flint, Michigan. His creative nonfiction and essays have appeared in Belt Magazine, Forge Literary Magazine, and Gravel Magazine. And he's a contributor to Belt Publishing's Midwest Architecture Journeys, published in October 2019. He was a staff writer for the Flint Journal, the Lexington Herald Leader, and the Detroit Free Press. And he was also an electrician at AC Spark Plug before moving into journalism. His debut novel, Motown Man, Here's the Windsor Connection, was published by Urban Farmhouse Press, based in Windsor, Ontario, just last fall. And Khary Mason is a native Detroiter who has family roots here in Essex County, a great Underground Railroad family. He has spent half of his life with the Detroit Police Department, and as a homicide detective, that's his latest role. Initially, photography and writing were nothing more than elements of his job that were used to aid memory. But in the past decade, recognizing the power that comes along with words and images, Khary took a more proactive approach by expanding his knowledge in both the fields of writing and photography. In 2015, he attended the College for Creative Studies to further his interest in photography and started to write and perform spoken word. And from 2015 to 2019, he was the co-lead of a photography project sponsored by the NJHIA at Princeton University. His multidisciplinary arts and law enforcement background, coupled with his early childhood experience, allow him to advocate for children of marginalized populations through mentoring, art, and speaking engagements. These are not only outstanding writers, but they are outstanding people, and we're just so glad to have them with us. So welcome, Bob and Khary.
Thank you.
Bob, I'm going to begin with you. I'm going to invite you to share some of your work with us. You have the floor for 15 minutes.
Okay, all right. Well, again, thank you so much for inviting me here today to kick off the 2021 By the River Reading Series. And Khary, it's a pleasure to meet you. Looking forward to hearing some of your work. And without further ado, I guess I'll jump in with a selection from Motown Man. Released back in November by Urban Farmhouse Press. So I'm going to read a section near the outset, kind of set the setting for the story, as well as introduce a little bit of the some of the tension that runs throughout the novel. The sprawling factory complex sat in the distance like a gigantic battleship in port. Bradley pulled into its immense parking lot, hopeful to find a spot close enough to the entrance to minimize his time outside. He inched his red Pontiac, the brand of excitement, according to the commercials, through the full lot, searching for a space of his own. He lucked out on a slot relatively close to the gate after spotting a departing third shifter, moseying up the aisle to his vehicle. Bradley slid right into the spot once the pickup truck vacated the space. To the factory floor he marched, following a long, slow journey up and then down 2 steep flights of stairs. For the arriving worker, the first staircase led upwards to a place once thought to be New Jerusalem for thousands of the city's flock who had migrated from the old country, places in Eastern Europe or the South, in search of something better. But after generations of enduring the monotony and the drudgery, the summer heat, the dirt, the smell, the lack of natural light, and the ups and downs of a punishing industry, more than a few now view the place as a hellhole. At the top of the stairs, workers encountered not St. Peter, but a plant security officer who sat ghostly at his post and watched indifferently. The entering workers waved their badges at him as if flipping him off. Past the sentry lay a 100-yard hike along an immovable gangplank that spanned the rail and salvage yards behind the factory. It traversed the space like an expressway slicing through a tired city, providing safe passage between life outside the plant and life within. Not unlike most days, Bradley's trek was lonely and anonymous in the dimly lit corridor. A stark contrast to the end of the shift when hordes of reawakened workers stampeded toward the exit like a herd of oppressed people who had recently been given a 16-hour furlough. Just up a ways, Bradley saw a lone man emerge from the shadows, headed toward him. Attired in all black in an all-American sort of way, black leather jacket unzipped, exposing a silk shirt, polyester trousers, and scuffed Stacey Adams wingtips. The man pimped with a cigarette in hand and chest pressed outward like a red-breasted robin. Upon encountering three middle-aged women dragging into work several paces ahead, like a small squad of war-weary troops returning to the front, the jaunty would-be player asked, "How y'all ladies doing?" Before they could ignore him completely, he added, "There's a man up there giving all the lovely ladies a kiss on the cheek." The player didn't bother to elaborate before continuing on his merry way past the tired trio and then Bradley soon thereafter. Yet, for all his charm and swagger, the waddling women were not impressed. The collective non-response suggested a kiss on the cheek had little value. "Kisses on the cheek, huh?" the red-haired woman muttered. "Shoot, I should be walking on my hands then." Bradley heard the woman's two comrades squeal with unadulterated delight, as though it was the best laugh they'd had in weeks, if not all year. He laughed too, from his safe position in the rear. He avoided passing them, all old enough to be his mother, so as not to cause them any embarrassment by interrupting their moment of joy. They continued onward while he exited an off-ramp, slowly descending a second flight of steep stairs to the level of the factory floor. En route to the stairway, Bradley felt the swell of familiar sounds as he passed through a short back hallway toward a swinging set of large plexiglass doors. Inside, hydraulic cylinders moaned with each extension and contraction of their pistons. Pneumatic screwdrivers whizzed and whined with the pitch of a dentist drill. High voltage electric motors whirred. Forklift truck horns trumpeted and scooters squeaked. The hum of climate changers bolted in the steel trusses high above the grimy floor resonated like a squadron of C-130s skimming the treetops. Workers shouted over the cacophony as the sounds all blended together in an orgy of noise and activity. Though loud, dirty, and sometimes hazardous, to him, the bustling scene and polyphony of sound could have a certain verve and rhythm that was, at times, jazzy. His route led him past rows of enclosed electric automatic tube vending machines, each one roughly the size of double-stacked large coffins. The department was almost serene compared to a decade or so earlier when scores of men and women manned standalone workstations, bending those hollow metal tubes on small manual presses into crazy sipping straws that delivered gasoline to a thirsty engine. In those days, workers placed the straight 2-foot metal pipes into the die one after another before energizing the press with dual palm buttons, which ensured the operator's hands were clear of any pinch points before the machine engaged. It was there where that nameless, voiceless man working at a frenetic pace, presumably to finish his production quota early or to catch up, so captivated teenage Bradley. A cigarette glued to his lips, the worker's arms and hands seemed to operate independently of his body like a drummer lost in a solo. His head bowed slightly. The man never stopped working, even as he peered momentarily over the tops of his green lens safety glasses, twice making eye contact with that young high school co-op student sporting the crisp white shirt and skinny yellow necktie from Hughes and Hatcher's department store. Whatever became of that man with that dangling cigarette and the cool safety glasses after those coffin-sized automated tube benders designed by electrical engineers like Bradley made that auto worker's job obsolete. Who knows, Bradley resolved long ago. The volume dropped as he made his way through the tool room where the skilled machine repairmen and tool makers went about their tasks, sometimes with the refined precision of a violinist, other times with the heavy-handedness of a club-wielding caveman. Along the way, he passed the shiny quarter that had been superglued to the floor and caused more than one unsuspecting chump to stop and try and pick it up. And each time he approached the tempting currency, he reminded himself, don't, it's a trick. The tool room produced much of the tooling and dies used in the various manufacturing processes at the plant. There, the ceiling was much lower and skylights were overhead. And like the factory's other skilled trades, tool and die makers were part of an exclusive blue collar, we can build any goddamn thing fraternity that paid damn good wages. It was a haven for the good old boys and their sons and relatives and others like them. And like all entrenched fraternities, getting on trades was helped immensely if you were connected to someone on the inside. And as the number of hourly rate production jobs dwindled, the future became less certain. More and more people sought out ways to get attached. Section break. Beep. Jim rolled up quickly behind Bradley out of nowhere. The engineer turned to greet the skilled trades foreman just as a three-wheel industrial strength golf cart rolled to a stop. Hop on, I'll give you a lift. Oh, thanks. Yeah, sure, said Jim, who jammed a burning cigarette with a quarter-inch of ash back into his mouth. The years of nicotine, caffeine, and restraining his enlarged impatience had tanned his raspy foreman's voice. Bradley stuffed aboard and sat down on the rear seat back to back with the trades boss. The yellow scooter jerked forward under Jim's quick acceleration, and they became two heads of the same coin rolling down the aisle. For the rear-facing Bradley, it was as though he was now traveling backwards through time. A trades boss needed transportation to keep up with his crew, whose millwrights, pipe fitters, electricians, welders, and unskilled laborers could be dispatched to any one of a dozen departments on construction projects in the plant's west end, like some kind of unchained gang. Though a millwright by trade, Jim had crossed over some time ago and went on supervision. No longer one of the boys among the blue-collar brethren, he traded for a white shirt and became just another suck-ass foreman. Jim could still play the game, though. Union solidarity, with its power of seniority and other levers, made it easy for a crotchety journeyman to teasingly tell him to go to hell sometimes, especially if the company was being stingy with overtime. But to those tradesmen caught sliding back late from lunch who would dare laugh at the prospect of being written up, his response was resolute with fake indignation. You guys stop that laughing, because I'm the one who's got to do the paperwork, which told everyone Jim's heart was in the right place. Bradley had subbed in as a trades foreman one summer as a college intern and was familiar enough with the terrain, the hazing and all. He thought such behavior fostered an independence that bordered on downright insubordination at times. A strong union made it possible. And in this one-horse town, the union was a Clydesdale. So he kept his mouth shut, mostly. Besides, Delcor Vehicle Systems was in the fight for survival, and the great corporate mothership had begun to seriously rethink its longtime practice of keeping all the automotive supplier business in the family. Rumors had become the plant's chief product and were churned out regularly about how the plant was destined to be sold, spun off, closed, or dynamited. Other companies could make the same products and components for much less, and they weren't unionized, so their wages dropped lower, and workers didn't tell their foremen to kiss their ass, jokingly or not. Without question, the union was a thorn in the company's paw, forcing the giant beast to tread lighter. Bradley was sympathetic of the auto workers' predicament and respected their tenacity, at least in theory. Jim chuckled, breaking the silence as the two men scooted through the plant. He plucked a cigarette from his lips and asked if Bradley knew some guy named Pulaski. The name meant nothing to Bradley. Yeah, he's a trades superintendent, Jim said. Ha! That cocksucker can be a real prick, but he's a good guy, I guess. He went to his Halloween party the other night dressed as a black hobo. Bradley grimaced, hoping he hadn't heard what he just did. Excuse me? A black hobo, Jim laughed. Bradley contorted himself just enough to see if Jim was serious. As he did, he got a face full of factory stench, a medley of lubricants, solvents, exhaust, and mustiness, and felt the sting of cigarette smoke in his eyes. He squinted and sharpened his focus. The scooter zigzagged around fork trucks loaded with raw, finished parts, scooters driven by other suckasses, and the black and white bodies of pedestrians that filled the aisles inside the division. Yeah, said Jim, still amused. He wore black shoe polish on his on his face and whatnot. And I guess he couldn't get much of it off come Sunday mornings, so he couldn't go to church. His voice was loud over the factory din and rushing air, his amusement undeniable. Except for the churning sounds of factory life, the men were again separated by silence. The scooter raced on before stopping in the spark plug fabrication area near Bradley's cubicle. Thanks, he said, hopping off. Yeah, sure thing, buddy. Jim turned and proceeded to drive off. He traveled a short distance before stopping again after hearing Bradley shout, "Hey!" Jim turned and saw a young man motioning for him to stop. He threw the scooter in reverse and backed up slowly. "Hey, let me ask you something." Bradley stepped forward toward Jim, meeting him before the scooter had come to rest. "Yeah." Jim's reply was quick with manufactured cheerfulness. "Were there any black people at that party?" "There," he said it. There was no taking it back. He didn't want to. His words struck like a brick through a plate glass window separating the inside from the out. With the slightest arch of eyebrows and a half-cocked, mirthless smile stretched thin across his lips, Bradley's cool expression said, "Well, appearances can be deceiving." Though something of a late bloomer physically, the once college boy now stood a shade over 6 feet with a lean build, but his heart throbbed in his throat and he felt the awakening of dormant butterflies in his stomach. Jim was rough-hewn in manner and dress, and with small rump roast for forearms. The foreman was built like a rook, but the engineer was braced with resolve. Bradley swallowed slowly to control his breathing and push his heart back down into its anatomically correct position. Jim's back stiffened, his expression flipped. He cleared his throat and his right eye twitched as a crimson tide washed over his fat head and neck. Jim's big hands gripped the steering wheel a little tighter as though he was now trying to negotiate the bends of a dangerous stretch of highway. No, I don't think so. I really don't know. I wasn't there. The words tumbled from his lips. Another guy told me about it this morning, but he didn't say anything about any blacks being there. Bradley hung on the way Jim said blacks. That subtle emphasis on the acts by some whites. The speaker gagging on its mere utterance, the enunciation signaled a thinly veiled contempt for its racial connotation. It was choked out in statements like, "You black guys have big cocks," and "black son of a bitch." Hey, Jim chuckled. I hope I didn't offend you or nothing. I didn't mean to buy. He shrugged as if to say, "Oh, well, fuck it." He reached for a crumpled packet of Merit cigarettes in his shirt pocket. Bradley's face smiled before he smoked. "I was just curious." Any thoughts of a rumble right there on the dirty factory floor dissipated quickly. There would be no blows exchanged because otherwise reasonable men don't have fistfights at work, unlike TV. The disappointment each man felt was palpable by the brief, awkward silence that followed. No, there would be no blows exchanged, but there would be no communion either. And each man prepared to leave with what he carried. "Well, thanks again for the ride." "Yeah, sure thing, pal," said Joe. "Yeah, sure." Bradley turned and strode toward his cubicle, and the foreman scooted away in the opposite direction.
I'm muted. Thank you so much, Bob. We're going to hear next from Khary. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the By the River series for having us on. The first piece that I'm going to read pretty much explains the responsibility of marginalized members of law enforcement. When I no longer possess a piece of tin or uniform that proves I'm not the boogeyman they fear, I too will experience whatever condition or suffering Black folks face. So why not use my position? It would be a great tragedy not to avail oneself of this hard-won privilege and understanding for the benefit of the masses while I have it. In life, a second can be an eternity. I've lived on the razor's edge for 708,825,600 of those seconds as a student of law enforcement. And as I neared my journey's end, I began looking backward in order to assess whether or not society had indeed become a safer place for my people because of the applied methods of policing on the less fortunate communities that I've served. I've been both a participant in and a witness to an unacknowledged war on poor people in our so-called civil society since I was 7 years old. Every 365 days, we use metrics and data to measure, to disguise our failures as successes, and are able to convince some that a minimal shift in the number of murders per calendar year are progress. We arrive at the same places to gift wrap vacant shells in body bags, console, investigate, and arrest generation after generation of the same families, from the same fields, from the same blocks, from the same houses, from the same rooms. That is not progress. The same families face tragedy constantly. A closed homicide case usually means that a citizen is dead and another's life has been taken, and both families are now missing parts, unable to be whole again. Why do we seek justice instead of seeking to stop the reasons these crimes are committed in the first place? That would be progress. Poverty is the most accomplished form of violence in existence. Where I live, the police response time has been as low as 30 seconds. In the neighborhoods that I've policed, law enforcement's response to some can be non-existent. Imagine being awakened by the screams of a woman, begging, pleading to the devil, saying, "Just kill me," as her spirit broke free from life's attachment to the present, hoping the pain would not follow. Now imagine her screams bound to the menacing utterances of her tormentor. Screams, struggle, and panic roll like thunder up and down the hallways, climbing from floor to floor, creating the unmistakable rhythm violence makes as you dial 911 for the first of 4 times. The music could be heard in the recordings of the dispatcher as he upends this new space in search of his instruments. The instruments used to create such an unforgettable melody of tragedy were the apartment walls, his fists and his feet, a knife that was broken in the chaos, a curling iron that had been plugged into the socket. Her pleas and her body became the drum upon which he'd beaten and pounded out those unstable chords of sorrow, which birthed an atmosphere where perspiration, tears, and sadness were consumed by the musician's punishment and rage. Imagine no help coming for 90 minutes. Now imagine, after listening to all of that, having to watch as Satan emerges from the building before driving away with a calm and peacefulness that calls into question whether the devil you heard and the devil you saw were indeed the same person. And by the time help finally arrives, the woman you were trying to save now lay dead, tortured, and stabbed more than 60 times. Remember that vast universe of seconds that encompasses my career? What I've come to understand is that in these urban pockets that have been forgotten by most, except for those who live or struggle there, is that when seconds count, the police are minutes away. And in those precious seconds, you have to make decisions that people in the outside world will never face or comprehend. In a poor community, the resources are in law enforcement. But in a model, thriving community, the resources are in education. Why is that? The robbing of dope dealers, the tasing death of a juvenile on an ATV, the coercive tactics used to rape motorists wishing to avoid the decaying orbit of perpetual tickets that lead to debtors' prisons. To the day the world witnessed a pressure applied on George's being, a pressure so great that his body could no longer hold on to his soul like toothpaste being squeezed from a tube. All of these incidents have happened because there is a belief that even with a witness, no one is looking and no one cares what happens to our most vulnerable. Cell phones and body-worn cameras won't stop it. They will only create a more visceral, visual record of our willingness to allow this genocide to continue. The conversation of what law enforcement was, is, and will be has been dominated by male Anglo-Saxon belief. And the result is we are able to use new and emerging technologies to get away with murder while placing more slaves in cages. So, if you are a marginalized member of law enforcement, speak now or forever hold your peace. Or, if you are quiet, just remember, your silence may cause you to be slaughtered by the beast.
Excellent, Khary.
So I got one more piece, and then we'll be done and ready to roll. So this piece deals with the belief that we've been conditioned to have, that if you suffer in life, there's something greater in store for you after. On March 10th, 1913, before she died, Harriet Tubman spoke for the last time saying, "I go to prepare a place for you." 51 years later, in January of 1964, Sam Cooke recorded "A Change Is Gonna Come." It was on that song that Sam Cooke would sing the words, "It's been too hard living, but I'm afraid to die, 'cause I don't know what's up there beyond the sky." This piece is titled, "When I Get to Heaven, I Wonder If Peter Will Let Me In." I was listening to Joe Rogan interview Cornel West the other day, and Rogan expressed the idea of what America could be if we all took a more active role in its direction. He said, "If you really loved America, you would want less losers." It made me think of what heaven must be like. And for me, heaven resembles my life in early 80s Detroit, before I knew I was poor, before my friends and neighbors all looked the same, before I heard gunshots, before people began to mispronounce my name, before I could describe what bullets do to flesh, back to the day when I asked and my wife said yes. A time when my parents were still married and my brother was still alive. A time before I learned to survive. A place where the best of the past and the best of the present live side by side. A place where my daughter could meet her uncle and children no longer needed a place to hide. A place where I didn't have to teach my children the rules to surviving being stopped by the cops. Then I thought of what America must represent in the minds of those who flock to its shores, to those who bang on the rusty old doors before their definition of family doesn't exist anymore. To those who seek asylum, escaping places filled with pain, in search of a place where they have been told they can be free, where they can be anything. If America is like heaven to those who have suffered elsewhere, why does it seem like nobody cares? Why do we have so few with so much and so many with so little? Are we treated so poorly because America is not ours to want? In my vision of heaven, there is no pain, no suffering, no hunger, and no despair. No one wants for anything in that place up there. They already have everything they could seek. No isms like race, no division at all, and no need to build any more walls. Their suffering was done here, and here is where it will stay. I know I'll see most of you up there one day. I see versions of people that look like everybody. I even see people there that look like you. When you think of heaven, who do you see? Do you see anybody there? Is there anybody there? Is there anybody there that looks like me? Thank you.
Thank you, Khary. That was extraordinary. And we're just so pleased that you're here with us, both you and Bob. So I'm going to take a few moments to pose a few questions to our guest authors. And if anyone in the audience wants to ask questions, please use the chat for that. So let's start with Bob. Bob, I want to first of all congratulate you on your debut novel. You've previously authored essays, creative nonfiction, and print journalism for 3 newspapers. How was the process of writing a novel different for you?
Much longer. So, you know, in writing a news article for example, typically you're writing for the next day's paper or certainly something within that week. And whereas with a novel, um, it's a much longer in detailed process. With a news story, you're putting sort of the news right in the first couple of paragraphs, the inverted pyramid. Whereas with in writing a novel, you want to get a hook in there to draw the reader in, but the story and the news, if you will, the theme, plays out over a much longer period of time. And so to sort of put it in very basic terms, sort of the gratification isn't as instant in writing a novel as it is in writing a news article, because again, you're going to see the results in your work pretty quickly. But the satisfaction is incredible. So
excellent. Khary, creative writing is something that you've discovered only in the last decade or so. What led you to develop this new passion for writing, and how do you feel your writing has evolved since you began?
Ask that one more time, I'm sorry.
Oh, no problem. So creative writing is something that you've discovered just in the last decade or so. What led you to develop this new passion for writing, and how do you feel your writing has evolved?
What led me to develop this new passion for writing, in part, I used words and imagery to capitalize on the mistakes of people who didn't have a lot, and in some cases put them in prison for the rest of their lives. And in flipping the machine against itself, I understood that words and imagery could be used to liberate people. But what sort of invigorated my writing in the last 5 years was in 2017, my son was called a nigger on the school bus. And I chose to get involved, much like my grandpa George McCurdy got involved with the school system in Amherstburg. And it caused me to advocate more vigorously and more fiercely for those that didn't have anybody advocating for them. I hope that answered your question.
It does. Well, how do you feel the writing has evolved since you got started then?
So my writing ebbs and flows with what happens in society. And so certainly this past year had given me a lot to think and write about. When life is difficult, I find myself writing a lot more, and the writing becomes a lot more painful, a lot more powerful, and a lot more visceral. But its end goal is to illuminate the issues that plague a great many people.
And because this is Black History Month, I'm just going to fill in a bit of information about George McCurdy, someone that many of us in Essex County and throughout Black Canada appreciated very much. For those who don't know, George McCurdy was the lead of the South Essex Citizens Council, which led to the closure of the last segregated school in Ontario in the 1960s. And he was a great activist and went on to become the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commissioner. So we are so grateful to him for his work, and to many members of the McCurdy clan who have contributed so much to our society. So Bob, my next question is for you. Motown Man explores relationships, family relationships, interracial romance, but it also explores issues of race and racism. I mean, there's even some old school diversity training that takes place in this novel. And whether there can be such a thing as a colorblind society is a question that's really asked. Obviously, there's been a resurgence of widespread interest in these topics due to the events of 2020. I'm wondering, in your opinion, does this book have the capacity to contribute to those broader conversations?
Well, I certainly hope so. What's the old cliche? The more things change, the more things stay the same. And so, when So, for instance, last year when some of the stories were coming out about different dignitaries, people of influence, had periods of, putting on blackface, in their younger days at some party, some frat party, whatever. Um, Diversity training. This takes place in the early 90s, but again, that has become, very much a topic of conversation. I guess it's called more or less bias training now. And so issues like that, again, I didn't write this book last week. It was a much longer process, but I was kind of struck by, um, uh, again, kind of a recurrence of some of the same things we've been talking about for a long time. This is in, you know, it becomes more contemporary, if you will, but a lot of the same issues, have persisted for so long. And so being able to, talk about some of those instances in a fictional sense allows us to really kind of uncover, at least I hope, uncover some of the the backstory to what's really going on. Again, the foreman that I wrote about, Jim, and a number of the tradespeople that he works with. I'm pretty sure they would be Trump Trump supporters. So so that kind of thinking attitude has been around for a long time. And so I think that some of the things that are talked about in the book, I think, are still very much in keeping with contemporary society, for better and for worse.
Thank you, Bob. Khary, in addition to your writing practice, you're also a superbly talented photographer and the co-lead of the Capturing Belief project, which helps students discover the power of visual storytelling. I'm wondering if you could tell us about your photography and the Capturing Belief initiative.
So, not long ago, just this past last year, actually, National Geographic wanted to participate in the conversation of race and making things better going forward. But before they did that, they realized that they had to have an independent look at their archive to see if they contributed in any way to the negative stereotypes that exist with regard to people from marginalized populations. What they found out was that going back through their archive to the late 1880s, they understood that their archive was indeed racist. It did create stereotypes. It did create beliefs of large groups of people that didn't exist before their images had been seen. And I understand that for a very long time, the camera and the pen and the paintbrush has been used as a weapon against people of color since it was understood it could be utilized that way. And so we aim to flip that narrative and teach children how to tell their own stories so that people do not create singular narratives for them. If you can advocate for yourself, if you can properly communicate, then life becomes a lot more easier for you. Life is very difficult if you cannot communicate your perspective. And so Capturing Belief seeks to do that, not only on its own, but through partnerships with groups like Inside Southwest Detroit or Ford Motor Company, because we realize that we cannot do it alone, and we expose them to other groups and other possibilities in the hopes that something may click. But the one thing that we want them to get from everything that we do is that life is easier if you can tell your story.
Fantastic. How can people get involved in that initiative?
So capturingbelief.com is our website. We are a 501c3. you can reach us at Khary, Khary, at capturingbelief.com, or through the website. The last cohort that we had two. They were remote. They included students from Nairobi, Kenya, France, Italy, Palestine, Detroit, and Rochester Hills. And then we had an all Kenyan cohort. At least once a year, we support an organization who would like to launch similar programming. And Kenya was the group that we supported this year. So that's how you can get involved, and we welcome your support.
Super, thank you. I see that Carol in the comments has asked Bob a question. It's a little bit related to what I asked previously, but have you noticed that the reception of your book has been impacted in any way by the events of summer 2020 through this year?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've received a lot of good feedback, and there was it was a review in the Lansing State Journal. The headline was, Motown Man, showed that there are no easy answers to, some of the challenges, topics presented. I'd like to, anecdotally, I would say yes, based on that.
Fantastic. I mean, I hope, having read the book in the fall and just found it so moving and powerful, I hope that it will open up some conversations, and I hope that people will not only appreciate it as literature, but kind of talk about the topics that are raised in it. There's a lot of content there to explore, for sure.
There was, there have been a couple of articles in some of the local publications here in Flint, because it's set pretty much in a fictionalized Flint. And so I've been encouraged, flattered by the reception, shown in some of those stories, and being able to tell some of the stories about a city like Flint that, part of flyover country, as places like Flint gets described as, and also, coming from the place where Flint was a generation or more ago, when the auto industry was booming here. I mean, this was like, an all-American city. In fact, it was named an all-American city back in the 50s. From that period to today, I think that seemed to resonate a lot with, the local residents, to Flint. So, I appreciate that.
Awesome. So Bob, what's next for you? What's your next big project?
You sound like the newspaper editor, after you have an A1 story, like, oh, that's great. What do you got for me? There's I'm gathering string on another book. When I say gathering, I'm very much in the early stages of it. Set around, professional Black male who, moves back to his hometown and finds it, some of the challenges that deal with, confront the city now, and, toying around with the idea of whether or not to work in sort of the Flint water emergency that has, so much has been written about over the last 5 years or so. So kind of playing around a little bit with that backdrop and some of the things that are associated with that. So, I'm always on the lookout for I like writing essays and creative nonfiction pieces. So I always like to jump into those from time to time. I'm not working on anything right now, but I have a couple of ideas there that I'm kind of kicking around.
That's exciting. We're looking forward to whatever's next. And Khary, same question to you. What's your next big project?
Well, I have a documentary on incarceration that will be coming out as a result of my fellowship with Documenting Detroit. It comes out March 11th. The information will be posted on my Facebook page, which is Khary Mason. And I'm looking forward to hopefully getting the book out that I've been writing. You just heard a couple excerpts from it by the summer.
Excellent. This is glorious. We're so grateful to both of you for being here. I'm just checking the chat to see if there are any additional audience questions. I don't see any, but I'm letting the audience know this is your last chance. So this is the last call for questions if you have any.
Khary, I just wanted to make sure, I had posted a link, is that correct, for the Capturing Beliefs in the chat there. Does that link correctly?
Let's see. Yes, that's us.
Okay, all right, good. So we can, we're gonna put that on our By the River website too, so people can access, and we'll have your bios up there as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we do have a question in the chat that I would like to pose to both Khary and Bob. What role do writing and the literary arts have in healing the divides in the world? Wow, that's a big philosophical question. I love it. So what role do writing and the literary arts have or play in healing the divides in the world? We'll start with Bob.
I was hoping to piggyback off of Khary's answer. I think that there's a very important role to play there. And one of the things I like about fiction is that it allows you, me, to say some things or explore some ideas that may be difficult to deal with in real life, or and when I say difficult, because when you're confronting someone face to face, so to speak, the wall goes up. You become instantly defensive, and so you can't necessarily think through what's being said, what's going on. And so I think one of the things about literature, certainly that what attracts me, is that it allows you to explore some of those topics, some of those issues in a way that is accessible and doesn't, that's accessible without the walls going up to shut down the understanding and the dialogue. I'm not saying it's not the end all be all, because sometimes those hard conversations and discussions need to take place. I'm not saying that they don't take place, but it's a way to introduce some of these ideas, some of these topics, and discuss them in a way that becomes more accessible, which then the reader can then take from that and sort of approach the world life in a different way, in an enlightened way.
Excellent. Khary?
So how can writing be used to heal the divides of the world, I believe, is the question. Like I said before, writing and imagery have been used historically to divide, but flipping the system on itself, I can give you my perspective. I can tell you who I am before we are ever in a room together, which prepares you to meet me and prepares me to meet you. And if you have gained anything from a differing perspective, you learn that there is power in difference. You shouldn't hate it and you shouldn't fear it.
Extraordinary. I mean, I have to say, from a Black history perspective specifically, there's a long history of literature that has served not only as great works of art, but as opportunities for the wider community to learn more about our issues and our concerns, and to develop empathy and to get more involved in social justice movements that benefited people of African descent and other populations. I mean, everything from Harriet Beecher Stowe and Uncle Tom's Cabin in terms of the push to end slavery in the mid-19th century in America, to much more recent writing that can really advance some of these conversations. And so I think there is a great capacity to use writing and the literary arts and film and theater and photography and other media to heal divides in the world. A great question from Chantel Browning Morgan. When did you first learn that language had power? Khary, I'll start with you.
So I spent most of my career in a plainclothes capacity, or most people refer to it as working undercover, where we would infiltrate neighborhoods. And what was very interesting was that almost everybody in every neighborhood that I worked in, they looked like me. They looked like you. They looked like my sister and everybody in my family. And perhaps I was too close in the beginning of my career to attempt to use the system differently to achieve a peaceful result. Like law enforcement is supposed to make society safer. When I got a chance to step back from being so close to the design dangers that exist in places filled with poverty, I understood that the reports that I was writing and the pictures that I was taking were so powerful that sometimes they could help or aid with the incarceration of an individual for the rest of their lives. That's when I understood truly the power of words and imagery, which caused me to go on a different path.
Thank you, Khary. Bob, same question. When did you first learn that language had power?
Well, one of the back in, I believe it was high school, junior high school, we were reading Richard Wright's semi-autobiographical novel, Black Boy. I remember when reading that book, how I could identify, identify with the character. And I haven't read it in a long time, but I just remember thinking then that, wow, this is, these are the kind of feelings that I have, or I understand where he's, what he's saying in this particular passage, the feelings that he's expressing there. Same with, the Invisible Man, and Ellison. And so for me, it was a way to, really being able to kind of open up and share really deep feelings, deep emotions on whatever the topic might be. I thought was something really, really, really powerful, and allowed you to kind of express yourself in a way that you couldn't otherwise. The other thing too is, I remember I found this book in my parent, the house I grew up in, and I think it was part of a book that my brother bought. It's called Afro 6. So, wrote in the late 70s. It's covered Black nationalism, about this group of six Black people who were going to sort of take over New York. And I remember in reading this book of how wonderfully imaginative it was, and the new different kind of words and ideas that were presented in that. And very different kind of book than the other two that I mentioned, but just kind of given that opening up that world of imagination and that vocabulary was something I thought was just really, really fun and interesting, and kind of, I guess, sparked an interest.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciate both of those responses, and our audience member Chantel also does. Well, that brings us to the end of our event. I'm going to once again express our deepest gratitude to Khary Mason and Bob Campbell for being here. And Emily, back to you.
Thank you, guys. My first Zoom meeting, so I appreciate so much bearing with me and my nervousness. But you stole the show, and rightfully so. Those were incredibly empowering stories and poetry. I couldn't be happier with this opportunity to bring this event together. So truly very thankful for today. We will continue to advertise and push anything that the three of you are doing in your future endeavors. So whatever way we can to bring your stories and your voices to light, that's what I feel is my duty. So thank you. Any closing remarks?
I'd just like to say thank you so much for the opportunity to be a part of the By the River reading series, and it was a pleasure to meet Khary and hear the wonderful work that he's doing. So I'm looking forward to checking out more of your work. But again, thank you very much, and thank you, Irene. Good to chat with you again.
Yes.
I just want to say thank you to everyone. Irene, thank you for inviting me. Bob, it was wonderful meeting you. And Emily, thank you so much for hosting us.
Yeah. Well, let's keep it up. We'll keep it flowing. We have next March, the middle Wednesday, the third Wednesday of the month, same time. And we look forward to continuing this series. And thank you to everyone that showed up. We will be recording and putting this together as a video. So if your friends and family couldn't make it, we'll package this up and make sure that we can spread these beautiful messages and words out there. So thank you.